104th meeting of the Audit Committee, Metropolitan St. Louis School District, April 5th, 2022, 7:30 a.m., 2350 Market Street. Roll call by the chair.
All right, we will note we do have a quorum with trustees Evans, Wilson, and Watson in the room. Trustees Fair and Nick present online, and trustee Wabi is not present today.
Can I get approval of committee meeting minutes, March 1st, 2022?
So moved. Second.
There's no comments by the chair. Internal audit, presentation report, process review of the procurement function.
All right, and we've got Todd Loretti here to present the findings of the audit.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. So this was a process review of the procurement function. So we'll be using this PowerPoint presentation to go over the report itself. So you move to slide 1. I'd just like to start by giving an overview of the finance department and our audit coverage of it. I have showed you this before, but I think it's a good idea to kind of keep you guys up to date on what we're doing. Finance is basically divided into 3 sub-departments: accounts receivable, accounting, and purchasing. Accounts receivable is also known as billing and collections. So we just did the revenue audit on that area. We issued that, if you look in the left-hand corner there, back in October 2021. Collections audit, we did that in 18. We'll be doing that again next year, next fiscal year. Excuse me. You move towards the middle, you can see we did the purchase to pay audit. We did that, issued that last spring. And then we also did a project accounting audit that was issued in the spring of 2020. So today here we're here to talk about procurement audit, which really focuses on the purchasing area. So if you move over to slide 2, so for the most part, the procurement function is administered and controlled by the finance department. So within finance, the main oversight is from the purchasing division. Now, engineering does participate in this process, in particular for the CRP programs. There's basically just 6 different categories that we look at within procurement, and 2 of those are related to CRP. Now, the purchasing division does currently consist of 7 individuals. There is the purchasing manager, who reports directly to the director of finance. There's 2 purchasing agents. There are 3 buyers. It says assistant buyer. That title has changed to just buyer. And there's 1 else office associate. That's basically the same setup that existed when we did the audit last time. If you move on to slide 3, the overall procurement process is governed by, the district charter. There's a purchasing ordinance 15310 that was adopted in November 2019, and there's also a general management policy, purchasing policy that was issued in February 2020. Now, these usually are updated every few years. We need to stay in compliance with what the state of Missouri is doing. We're kind of bound by their guidelines. Now, the last time we looked at this area was in 2018. The cycle involves the process of procuring all the supplies, materials, equipment, and so forth, and services needed by the district. Procedures include soliciting pricing and proposals from suppliers, processing quotes, bids, and proposals received from the suppliers, tabulating and evaluating those submissions, documenting and communicating the results, establishing contracts, and obtaining and maintaining appropriate supported documentation for that activity. If you move to slide 4, I'll take just a few minutes to kind of go over the difference between procurement and purchase to pay, which are two audits that we do. That they are connected, but there's a difference. Look at the top half of the slide. So the procurement function is mainly the focus is on vendor and supplier selection, the process to select the vendor and supplier we're going to do business with. If you look to the left, you can see everything basically 10,000 or more requires competition, including the CRP projects submitted by engineering. And look to the right in the top hand corner, you see there are 6 different categories that I mentioned. The 2 bottom ones, 5 and 6, are CRP. Those are 2 that were engineering are involved. Look, the bottom half, purchase to pay. Now that cycle, that audit is mainly focused on the process to actually purchase and make payments to those vendors and suppliers that we have selected to do business with. Now, if you look down to the bottom left hand corner, you can see requisitions below 10,000. Those do not require any competition. That's kind of up to the individual divisions, just to who they're going to do business with. One thing I did want to mention is the review of purchase orders. We do kind of look at that in both audits. So we do have a recommendation within this audit that we identified through this audit. So that one kind of, we look at it in both audits. Any questions there? Slide 5, as far as scope, the scope here for transactions was fiscal years 20, 21, and 22. Slide 6, as far as overall objectives, we did obtain an understanding of the process and controls utilized for the procurement cycle. When to verify the procedure designed and executed in accordance with the district policy and ordinances and so forth. Now, we did identify an issue within that kind of the area as to being compliant with policy. Wanted to make sure the process and controls are performed in a manner that allows for a fair and equitable vendor selection process. Make sure the compliance with district diversity guidelines as they apply to the procurement process. Basically, there should be a review and sign off on diversity on certain categories. Proper safeguarding of district assets, make sure the procedures are effective and efficient and accurate. Adequate separation of duties. Want to make sure adequate and appropriate documentation is maintained also. So, and our one issue that we did identify, documentation was part of that issue. You can move on to slide 7. We'll talk about our approach and methodology for this. We did obtain all the policy and procedures and ordinances along with the district charter, obviously. Now, purchasing and engineering have these procedures pretty well documented. There's a lot of documentation and really have outlined as how the steps that need to be taken. They probably looked at 10 to 15 documents from those sources. We did, as we always do, we did a walkthrough procedure with the personnel. We met with everybody in purchasing, including, and then we also met with the personnel for engineering. They're involved in this process. I met repeatedly with the purchasing manager. She was a great help on this. So we spent a lot of time working through things with them. So we obtained transaction data files by category. And from those data files, we made a selection of the awards that were processed through the various categories. Again, they're listed there again. There's the same 6 that I just showed you in the previous slide. I guess the one thing I wanted to mention here is, so categories 1 through 4 are handled entirely by the purchasing department. Now, categories 5 and 6, no, 5, I should say, 5 is a combination of purchasing and engineering personnel. Now, 6 is mainly engineering personnel with a little oversight from purchasing. Move on to slide 8. Once we had our selections, we did some testing. We looked for existence of properly documented approvals, existence of maintenance of adequate supporting documentation, adherence to the notification and announcement procedures. So district is required to advertise and post these opportunities, post the results and so forth. We tested to ensure that evaluation procedures were properly performed and documented. Tested to make sure we're adhering to the timelines and we're in compliance with the policies. Any questions? As far as results, at slide 9, we had satisfactory opinions. This went really well. Again, I think I kind of mentioned this. Purchasing really does have some solid, well-documented procedures in place, as does engineering. We identified one opportunity for improvement. The title of that is Creation, Submission, and Approval of Purchase Orders of $10,000 or more by non-purchasing personnel. Let's move on to slide 10, and we'll go over this. This item can be a little convoluted, so I'll try to break it down into some pieces. Hopefully this makes sense. By policy, all purchase orders of $10,000 or more should be created, reviewed, and approved by the purchasing division personnel. Now, they're in place, so they're going to make sure the propriety of the transactions They're going to make sure district competition policies and procedures are followed. They're going to make sure the required supporting documentation is prepared. So basically, non-purchasing personnel should not create purchase orders of $10,000 or more. So what should happen is instances where there is going to be a purchase of $10,000 or more, the non-purchasing personnel is to stop at the point the requisition has been approved. So basically, they create a requisition, it goes to the supervisor, supervisor approves it, and then it stops there. And from that point on, purchasing personnel takes over there due to the competition, they create the PO and so forth. Now, there is one very important distinction that I need to make here. This does not apply to what we call complex purchase orders. Those are used for the district's capital improvement and replacement program. Those items have a different process in order to be carved out of this, what we're talking about here. The system is set up in a manner that ensures that these complex purchase orders are reviewed and approved by purchasing. So there's a lot of extra steps involved with those. I'm not going to go into those, but just know that we're carving those out of this recommendation. Slide 11. So again, we're talking about the normal purchase order. So we did identify 4 individual transactions of $10,000 or more in which purchasing was bypassed, basically. Transactions totaled about $212,000. So basically what happens, non-purchasing personnel created 4 purchase orders of $10,000 or more that were routed directly to non-purchasing personnel for approval. So purchasing never saw those transactions. This is a system weakness that needs to be addressed. The system that should not allow this to occur, basically. So all 4 transactions were legitimate and proper in nature. There's no issue with the actual transactions. There were consultant costs for bond issues, costs for election costs. The issue is with how they were processed. It was proper that no actual competitions were performed, competition procedures. But it does appear to us that 3 of the 4 probably were sole source items, which means they should have some additional documentation that should have been prepared for these items. Slide 12. So as we were going through this, my question was, well, how did these get approved? So the answer to that is there's a very limited number of non-purchasing personnel in upper management that do have the ability to approve purchase orders of $10,000 more. This is in place as an additional control. The purchasing manager's limit is 25 million. So anything above that requires an additional approval from this very select group in upper management. So that's why that system of ability there is there. It's a good additional control to have. So last slide 13. So our recommendation to further strengthen the controls here. So the purchasing group already does train several times a year with the different departments. So we're going to recommend, hey, let's continue that training, continue to focus on this topic of when you do not prepare, a PO over $10,000. And then, as you guys are probably aware of, we're in the process of upgrading Oracle to the cloud. So as part of the implementation, we're recommending that finance, along with the implementation team, implement a new hard control within the system that will prevent this from happening. So. Any questions here? Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. Tentative date, May 3rd, 2000. Meeting adjourned.
Trustee Nicholasison, we will be, we're exchanging documents right now. I'll let you know when we're ready to go.
Okay, sounds good.
Trustee Nicholasison, we can start when you're ready.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 228th meeting of the Program Management Committee, meeting for the Metropolitan Sewer District. Can I get a roll call?
Yep, we will record the roll from the previous meeting, and we do have a quorum.
Approval of committee meeting minutes from March 1st.
Second.
And we're on to the engineering items.
Good morning, trustees. In your packet, you'll find the engineering agenda items for next week's meeting. The first 5 items on the agenda are green infrastructure grant programs required by our CSO long-term control plan and our consent decree. The first item is a green infrastructure volume reduction grant to our Newstead Avenue Starb improvements. The ordinance authorized the district to enter an agreement with Washington University School of Medicine to provide financial assistance through the Green Infrastructure Grant Program for the construction of green infrastructure. The purpose of this project is to reduce combined sewer overflows to the Mississippi River. This project will reduce runoff with the installation of 4 bioretention basins. The total cost of the project is estimated at $68,000, and Washington University is requesting approximately $68,000 for reimbursement for the cost of this green infrastructure. In your packet, you'll find a map for each one of these grants that I'm going to be discussing. This one's located obviously south of Forest Park and east of Kings Highway in the Washington University Barnes Complex. They're reconstructing Newstead Avenue and putting in bioretention basins along there to collect the street runoff. Next item is a green infrastructure grant for Rankin in the 4300 block of Evans. This ordinance authorized the district to enter into agreement with Rankin Technical College, provide assistance through the Green Infrastructure Grant Program. This is to reduce combined overflows to the Mississippi River. Project will reduce runoff with the installation of amended soils and permeable pavers on properties being redeveloped by the college. The total cost of the project is estimated at $44,200, and the technical college is requesting $44,200 reimbursement. This particular project's located in North St. Louis City, south of Martin Luther King Drive and east of Newstead, on Evans Avenue. There are several properties being redeveloped by the technical college for residential properties, and then they're putting in permeable parking pavers for the homeowners and doing amended soils to capture the runoff from those new homes. Next one is a green infrastructure for So Grow Apartments Phase 1. The center's in agreement with Cornerstone So Grow LLC, provide financial assistance. This will reduce combined sewer overflows to the River de Pear for the long-term control plan. This project will reduce runoff with the installation of 2 bioretention basins. This is located in South St. Louis City. The cost for the estimated for this bioretention basin is $284,200, and Cornerstone is requesting approximately $284,200 reimbursement. If you look at the map, this is located in South City near Kings Highway in Chippewa. It's a redevelopment of an apartment complex in that area, and they're capturing from their parking and from the buildings into 2 bioretention areas located on this particular site. Are we okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. All right. Next item is green infrastructure for Washington University School of Medicine, South Kings Highway parking project. Provide financial assistance through the Green Infrastructure Grant Program. This is to reduce combined sewer overflows to River de Pear. This project will reduce runoff and install 1 large bioretention basin at the property being redeveloped by the school in that area. The total cost of the bioretention basin is $1,403,845, and Washington University is requesting approximately $1,336,000 reimbursement for the cost of this green infrastructure. Located at the map, it's a large redevelopment project. It's just east of Kings Highway and just south of Manchester. The Washington University is developing some parking in that area, and they're running that parking through a large bioretention basin to the south of the property before it reaches our combined sewer system, thus reducing overflows. Next item is for Tower Grove Park East Stream Restoration Project. Ordinance authorizes the district to enter agreement with Tower Grove Park, provide financial assistance through the Green Infrastructure Grant Program. Purpose of this project is to reduce combined sewer overflows to the River de Pere for the long-term control plan. This project will reduce with the installation of 5 bioretention basins. Those will be adjacent to the stream restoration project. The total cost of this project is estimated at $1,700,000, and Tower Grove Park is requesting approximately $1,700,000 for this project. If you look at the map, this is located in the park itself on the east end. There's a large open channel stream that receives water from the park to the stream. So what they're doing is they're capturing flow that gets to that stream. As you can see on the map, there's also underneath there is a large combined sewer system that captures these flows. This will capture this flow, hold it in the detention basins before it reaches the combined sewer. Any questions on the Green Infrastructure Grant Project? All right, thank you. The next 3 items are all intergovernment agreements with municipalities for reimbursements through our OMCI reimbursement project. If you recall, we hold out funds within certain OMCIs and make those available to the municipalities so they can do priority projects in their areas. So it's approximately 50% of the funds that are generated in these OMCIs are made available to the municipalities based on the amount of funding that they put into the OMCI based on their tax dollars. So I'm going to discuss 3 agreements today. The first one authorizes the district to enter into agreement with the city of De Pere. It authorizes us to enter an intergovernmental agreement for eligible stormwater expenses within the Deer Creek watershed. Eligible stormwater expenditures include storm sewers, inlet construction, drainage improvements, stream bank stabilization, and erosion control projects. It also includes clearing under bridges, cleaning detention basins, stormwater planning and engineering costs are as determined appropriate by the district. This particular project, the city of De Pere is performing, is called the Jargon Trail Storm Improvement Project. The amount of this project is $39,349. The city is going to contract for design and construction to reconstruct and adjust the grade of the street, construct approximately 28 feet of storm sewer and a double curb inlet to address drainage in the area. The estimated cost of this project, again, is $39,349, and this provides for the reimbursement for that full amount. The next project is also in the city of De Pere. Again, the ordinance authorizes the district to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the city of De Pere for eligible stormwater expenditures. This particular project for the city of De Pere is called the Highland Avenue Storm Sewer Improvement Project. The city will contract for construction services to replace approximately 240 linear feet of storm sewer culverts and inlet curbing and rock ditch liner on Highland Avenue. The estimated cost for the construction is $113,446, and this agreement provides for reimbursement up to $98,516. You will note that City of De Pere actually lies within 2 OMCIs, so they're doing a project both in the Sugar Creek OMCI and the Deer Creek OMCI. And the second project here the amount of funding. We've done this reimbursement program for 2 years. So this funding for this project is actually coming out of 2 years worth of money available to the city of Bear. Next item is the reimbursement from the Coldwater Creek OMCI, and this reimbursement is to St. Louis County. This ordinance will authorize us to enter an intergovernmental agreement with St. Louis County for eligible stormwater expenditures. St. Louis County project that they're doing is the J.S. McDonald Culvert Repair. The city will contract for construction services to replace 2 failing culverts and appurtenances. The estimated cost of this construction is $200,000, and this agreement will provide for us to reimburse the county up to that $200,000. And again, this appropriation is from the Coldwater Creek OMCI watershed. Are any questions regarding the reimbursement project? Okay. The next item, the next 2 items are both construction projects that were bid this past month. First one, infrastructure repair, rehabilitation, contract B. This action appropriates funds and authorizes the district to enter into a construction contract. The work to be done consists of rehabilitation of approximately 66,000 linear feet of sanitary sewers from 8 to 48 inch in diameter using the cured in place pipe method. The purpose of this project could reduce infiltration and to rehabilitate older, damaged, and deteriorated sanitary sewers throughout the district's boundaries. Sewers identified for rehabilitation are identified through our CMOM inspection program run by our operations folks, and it is also a requirement of the consent decree. The district received 2 bids. The low bid was from SAK Construction. The bid is slightly above the engineer's estimate, and the appropriation of $2,650,000 is just above the budget for the project. SAK has committed to just over 22% MBE and WBE participation on this particular project. The goal is 10% minority, 10% women. Those are the goals set by the Missouri State Revolving Fund. The district utilizes those funds for our rehabilitation projects that we do throughout the district. Are there any questions? Okay. Next item is the St. George Creek Sanitary Relief Project. This action appropriates funds and authorizes staff to enter a construction contract. The work to be done consists of construction of approximately 2,400 linear feet of sanitary sewers, 8 inch to 21 inch in diameter. The purpose of this project is to reduce building backups and overcharged sanitary sewers. And this project will provide for elimination of 1 constructed sanitary sewer overflow, which is required by the consent decree. The district received 4 bids on this project. The low bid was from Keeley Construction Group Incorporated. The bid was above our design estimate, and our appropriation of $4.2 million, which includes contingencies and relocation funding, is approximately $900,000 over the original planned budget. One of the things we did do an analysis of the bids that came in. All the bids were above our estimate and above our budget. There was additional tunneling that's required. The location of this project, if you'll look at the map, is located in South St. Louis County near McKenzie and Gravois. And there's a venue in that area. It's an outdoor venue for food trucks and things like that. It's called 9 Mile. It's a park used quite a bit. We're actually going right through that 9 Mile. So there was quite a few requirements put on that as to when and when we couldn't work. There was some additional tunneling on both sides of that on Gravois and McKenzie that weren't necessarily taken into consideration in our estimates or the original budget. So that's why we're over budget. In addition, we're kind of monitoring, obviously, with inflation and escalation of different materials. We're kind of monitoring. We've been staying pretty stable around our estimates, but over the last couple of months, we're starting to see things right around our estimates and a little bit higher. So obviously, we'll monitor that and and keep an eye, and we're obviously taking that into consideration in next year's budgets. The Healy Construction has committed to almost 24% minority participation on this particular project, and that's African American, goal of 17% for the project. Are there any questions? All right, the following is the Reeser Drive Starb Sewer. This appropriates additional funds to an ongoing construction contract that's being performed by Tailor Made Construction Company. This is a supplemental appropriation that was unplanned in the budget. The work to be done consists of the construction of approximately 1,000 feet of storm sewer, 15 to 24 inch in diameter. Purpose of this project is to alleviate yard flooding, yard erosion, structure flooding on Reeser Drive and Buckeye Drive in the cities of Calverton Park and Ferguson. This supplemental appropriation for $125,000 is necessary due we had additional cost. There was a direct conflict with a water main in that area that originally thought could be worked adjacent to, but it was in direct conflict, both vertical and horizontal, so we had to relocate the water main. And with that, it's in a residential area, so then we had to additionally relocate the individual service lines for the homes in the area. And that was a cost above what we had originally appropriated. So we're asking for $125,000 to bring the total appropriation for this project to $675,000. Are there any questions? And then the final item is our general services agreement for easement acquisition services. This ordinance authorizes staff to enter into a contract with O.R. Colin Associates for easement acquisition services associated with the acquisition of easement rights by negotiation or condemnation. The acquisition services will be provided on an as-needed basis as required to obtain property rights. Work will be signed on a project-by-project basis. No appropriations are necessary under this proposed ordinance, and that acquisition services are included. We'll fund these services as part of our annual funding for easement acquisition, either by the individual project or we have annual appropriation for easement acquisitions. This is a staff extension. We maintain right-of-way staff of about 5 individuals. We've got some recent retirements, and this allows us to utilize this service to help us keep up with our easement acquisitions and take us over the kind of the humps where years where we have quite a few easements. So it's basically a staff extension. This is a new contract. We did go out for proposals. We sought proposals and we received proposals from 3 different areas, and O.R. Colin was the selected proposer. O.R. Colin has done this for the district for the past few years and done it very successfully. So we'll use them. This is for 1 year with 2 option years on this particular contract. Are there any questions? If not, Mr. Nicholson, that completes my report.
All right. Thank you, Rich. Our next meeting is scheduled for May 3rd, 2022. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Thank you.
Trustee Fair, we'll let you know when we're ready to go.
Thank you, Brian.
Trustee Fair, we're ready to go.
Great, good morning. This is the 277th meeting of the Finance Committee of the Metropolitan St. Louis Sewer District. Roll call, please.
Okay, we'll record the same roll as we had for the previous two meetings. We do have a quorum.
Thank you, Tim. Can I get a motion for approval of the committee meeting minutes from March 1st, 2022?
Second.
Minutes are approved. I have no comments this morning. It looks like we have a healthy agenda, so let's move on with item number 4, the Cronus ordinance.
All right, that first one is we have John Sprague from IT here to present that one.
Good morning, trustees. The first item today is the introduction and adoption of a proposed ordinance 15893. This is for payroll and time reporting services, software as a service. This ordinance would allow us to enter into the contract for implementation of these services and authorize the first year of these outsourced services for payroll. The implementation services will have a cost of about $145,000 with Kronos, and it'll be led by the information department, IT department. And then after the implementation, there'll be an annual service cost of about $250,000 a year, which will be budgeted in the HR budget starting fiscal year 23. So the initial contract will begin after implementation is complete. And this contract authorizes the first year, but then there'll be additional 4 optional 1-year renewals with this contract. If you remember, 2 months ago, I brought a contract for these same services to the board for an introduction with ADP. We cannot successfully negotiate that contract, so we've moved on to the second bidder here, Kronos, and that's why we're bringing it forth as an intro and adoption in the coming board meeting. Are there any questions?
Is there any explanation for the differences in those bids, or is that why you couldn't bring that first bid? Or does that have a bearing on it?
The primary difference is the implementation cost. ADP give us a discount, but we couldn't come to them with terms, but they had a pre-built interface for Oracle where Kronos has an interface tool that has to be configured to match. So I think the large difference is the implementation cost is the efforts for Kronos to configure their interface tool to work with Oracle instead of in a pre-built one. Is that enough? Does that answer your question?
Yes.
All right, then if there's any other questions?
Okay, there are no other questions in the room.
Okay, no other questions. Let's move on to the portfolio review, please.
All right, thank you. I'll take the next couple of items. The portfolio review is the report we look at every month. I will start in the upper left quadrant. Our portfolio total par amount increased about $17 million this month. This is primarily just due to some timing of expenditures versus income, as well as the increase in interest rates increases the rate we earn on bank deposits. Some of those bank deposits are used to offset bank fees. So as rates go up, we can keep less funds in the bank and shifts those over to investments. So we see a little bit more par amount this month. The biggest change that you'll see on this sheet is in the benchmark yield to maturity amount. That 222 is up 75 basis points from last month. That is a huge 1-month increase. Our portfolio yield to maturity only went up a few basis points. We talk about this, and we talked about it in depth last month about how only a small portion of our portfolio turns over every month. So this month you really see the impact of that because the benchmark increased a lot. We increased just a little bit. The new investments we had did increase our yield to maturity, but we only had a portion of the portfolio turnover, as well as we kept the investments that we had a little bit shorter than the benchmark because of matching up some needs for expenditures that are known later in the year. Sector allocation, commercial paper is up a little bit more than it has been recently. For short-term funds, we get a little bit higher yield there than we do in the other investments typically, but everything's within policy limit, so we're in compliance. No big changes in the fund summary. Debt project funds continue to go down. That's going to lead into a conversation we're going to have next. Then on maturity distribution looks the same. You see the benchmark again is all in 2 to 3 year treasuries, whereas we have our portfolio spread out among the different maturity buckets. Any questions about that? All right, if not, I'm going to move to the next item. And I'm going to kind of combine this debt sources presentation with the underwriter's resolution. Back in January, I was quarantining, and our assistant Secretary Treasurer John Stroman talked to you about an opportunity we had with WIFIA, which is a federal loan program, low-cost, long-term federal funds. And so it sounded like a good discussion. I wish I was here for it. But some of the questions that came out of that were kind of like, well, if we have these kind of opportunities, why do we do capital markets debt, which are generally a little bit more expensive? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about the types of funding that we use for the capital investment replacement program, and why we use a variety of sources, including the capital markets. So as you know, the CIRP is our largest annual budget expenditure, hundreds of $millions a year. The budget that Marion's going to present you in a little bit will show, from fiscal year 22, which is the year we're wrapping up now, to the next 3 years, we've got about $1.7 billion of wastewater capital projects budgeted. That is hundreds and hundreds of projects, a lot of money, and so we use a variety of sources that I'll talk about in a second for paying for those. Portion of it is user charges, so it's money that comes right from the customers, and that's what we call pay-go or cash funding. Then we use capital markets debt, which is your traditional hiring some banks to go out and issue bonds. Use state revolving fund, which are low-cost subsidized loans from the state, and we also use WIFIA, which is the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, which is what John talked to you about in January. So on the next page, I just want to talk a little bit more in depth about some of those sources and why we use them all and why it's not practical or possible to use only the lowest cost ones for everything that we need to borrow. So the biggest point of the capital market, it is the deepest pool of capital in the world. There is trillions of dollars that is put to work there all the time. Even in just municipal bonds, there's trillions of dollars outstanding in municipal bonds. So when you need money, that's the first place to look because that's where the most money is. The state revolving fund has been a great source for us, but it's very limited. The state puts together a few $100 million to work every year. Even if we got all of that money in a typical year, it wouldn't fund all of our projects, and the state has to spread that out among all the other projects in the state that also qualify. So when they issue their intended use plan every year, they generally say they want about 30% of their funds to go to large entities in the state. We'd be one of the large ones, but not the only one. They're only looking to put a small portion of that few $100 million to work in areas like MSD. So that capital is not always entirely available to us. Now, we've gotten more than anybody else has because we're big and we've got projects ready to go. But the opportunity there is limited. Can't fund our whole program with it. WIFIA is similar. That's a federal program. There's a little bit more money because it's on a national scale, but the window opens up one time a year, and it's a competitive process. You submit a letter of interest, and they review those, and they come back and they tell you, yes, we invite you to apply for a loan, or no, we don't. So again, it's competitive, it's limited. You can't necessarily count on that money being available. So the capital markets, again, deepest, also the quickest to market. Like we can say, okay, we need money to fund this, and in a couple of months we can be out there and get money. The estate revolving fund and WIFIA is usually a couple-year process. You kind of plan your projects. You have to apply project by project, so it's very specific on the projects. And then there's a review process at the state or the federal level where they say, yes, this qualifies, we're willing to give you money. Or they say, no, we are not willing to give you money. We either don't have the money, there's other projects that have a higher priority, or we can't fund this right now because we don't have enough money available. So we can't plan on those always being available. So generally what we do is when we budget for capital markets debt, but then we try to fill in or replace that at the lower cost as the opportunity arises. We tend to focus on bigger projects for those because that's where you get the biggest bang for the buck because there is lower interest rates on those. But the capital markets is usually where we start because we have the most flexibility with those funds as well. And that's another point on here. We can use those capital market funds for any of our projects. And our projects might range from a few $100,000 to a few $100 million. So if we have a readily available source of capital market funds, they can fund any of our projects. Again, the state revolving fund and the WIFIA are project specific. So when we have those funds, we can only use those funds to pay for that specific project. So we have more flexibility and more availability on the capital market side. Now, on the downside, the capital markets fund, when we borrow that money, we get it all at once, and we have to start paying interest on it right away. And it usually takes us a year to two to spend that money down. So we're paying interest on that, even though that money is not going to projects right away. We are allowed to invest it, so we can offset some of that cost. So one benefit of rates going up is that we can offset a little bit more of the interest cost that we're paying with the interest costs we will receive on investing those proceeds until they're spent. The state revolving fund and WIFIA are nice because we draw on those, so they make a loan balance available, but we only pay interest as we reimburse project costs. So that's one way that those save us a little bit of money in the near term. Capital markets, when you hear about interest rates going up or down, that affects the capital markets rates. It affects the others, but to a lesser extent because the state revolving fund is subsidized. So there's a benchmark. It's a bond buyer, 20 or 25 bond index, and we only pay 30% of that rate when we borrow from the SRF fund. So we've been seeing SRF rates around 1%. They'll be a little bit higher now because rates have gone up, but still lower than capital markets. WIFIA is essentially at a treasury rate that matches the average weighted life of the loan that you need. So if we're borrowing for 35 years and we've got principal payments maybe in the back 15 years, let's say it's a 25-year loan, the rate on that loan will be the 25-year treasury rate. Which again, being a flat treasury rate versus a market rate with some kind of credit spread is usually going to be lower. So generally the highest interest rate is on the capital markets, although typically on an annual basis, we are not paying any more than we are, for example, for an SRF. And the reason for that is the SRF are generally 20-year loans, and the capital markets are 30-year loans. So with the SRF, the big savings is on those back 10 years where you've already paid off the loan. You don't have additional interest and principal payments. But because you're paying over 20 years, you have a compressed schedule that you're paying more principal annually. So it's kind of like a 15-year versus a 30-year mortgage. You get a lower rate on a 15-year mortgage, but your annual costs might actually be higher because you're paying that amount of principal back in a shorter time. So you have higher annual principal costs. That's the way the revolving fund and the capital markets work. So if we're trying to decide between capital markets and state revolving fund, we have to look at whether or not we even have been approved for state revolving fund or how quickly we can get on the calendar to get money. And then we look at cost savings. The cost savings is going to be better on the state revolving fund, but those savings are going to start for 20, which are still savings. So we still want to get as much of that as we can. To a lesser extent, there's different issuance costs. When the kind of money we're talking about, those are very small, not a big impact. Capital markets is one of the higher cost ones, but it covers so many projects on a per project basis, a lower cost. State revolving fund and WIFIA, since they only fund a specific project or maybe a very small group of related projects, you have a higher per project cost, but you might have, for state revolving fund, you have lower overall costs. WIFIA is actually probably our highest on a per dollar basis issuance cost, because there we're also paying all the funds of the federal contractors that are helping them set up the loans. We pay their advisor, we pay their bond counsel, which we do in the capital markets as well. We pay the underwriter's bond counsel. And then the other thing is administratively, obviously when you're issuing tax exempt bonds, there are IRS and SEC rules, there's reporting requirements, things you have to follow. There are additional requirements with any of the funds that come from the federal government. And a portion of the state revolving fund is capitalization from some federal sources. There's things like Davis-Bacon, Buy American Steel. They can add cost of project. They definitely add reporting requirements at administrative time. So they're a little more complex to keep up with overall. So all of these are important in funding our capital needs. I'm not trying to say one is better or worse. We need them all. We start with the capital markets because that's where the money generally is. And generally what we've done historically is budget about $30 million a year for SRF. we have gotten significantly more than that. And so as it's available, we replace what we have budgeted in capital markets with the lower cost funds. And that helps keep our rates lower. So when we go into each rate commission, we were able to say, hey, we had forecast that we were going to spend this much on debt. We're actually spending less because we took advantage of these opportunities. But it's not practical to replace all of that capital markets debt because the opportunity isn't there, and you have to plan it years in advance. You don't know if it's going to be available or not. And so we've done a good job of that. We were the first group in the country to get WIFIA funding. There were 12 out of 50 or 60 applications. We were one of the 12 that were accepted. And then now we are going to become one of just a handful of entities that have received 2 WIFIA loans, and there aren't that many of those. So we're going to be one of those. So we are working hard to take advantage of those opportunities. If you look at the next page, this just gives you a picture since we started our borrowing program in 2004. The blue is the funding we've received from capital markets. The yellow is the SRF. You see a lot of yellow in there. So we've definitely gotten more than our share of SRF. Again, we're the largest borrower from that program in the state of Missouri. Then the green is the WIFIA funding. And over kind of toward the right-hand side, you see a little dashed line going through the bottom. Everything to the right of that dashed line is forecast. And so on our budget, you can see that we have SRF and WIFIA forecast much higher than we typically have, and that's due to discussions that engineering and treasury have had with the state about availability of these funds. And so again, this shows how we are trying to keep our costs lower than what we have budgeted, which would be more on the capital market side. Now, that said, I do have a capital markets opportunity I'm bringing before you today. This initially, on the next slide, we'll talk about this a little bit. We do have a small refunding that's available to us. So as you recall, our bonds typically become callable or refundable 10 years after issuance. We've had opportunities to refund prior to that 10-year call date, either using taxable bonds before the tax law changed in 2017. We could do that on a tax-exempt basis. And then we've also had some banks come to us with opportunities to enter into forward contracts where we lock the rate, but contract to issue refundings later. We've found significant savings, over $200 million worth of bond savings by doing that over the last few years. But here is a small piece. It's less than $20 million that is hitting that 10-year call date. It had not been refunded before because it's got smaller coupons, generally 3 to 4%. So the refunding opportunities for savings weren't there before. And the refunding amount is very small right now. We're going to talk about that more next month. I'll have an intro and adopt on a bond ordinance next month. I'm just kind of teeing this up because I've got a resolution related to the bank team to help us lead this that will be on this month's agenda. We also have a new capital markets borrowing that I'd like to put before you. The $100 million, it was in the budget actually for later this calendar year in December. But because interest rates have increased so quickly lately, and we expect them to continue to increase, our municipal advisors and I believe it makes more sense to do this now with the refunding rather than wait and risk higher interest rates at the end of the year that could increase the total cost of the debt. So 2 things. We think we can, even though rates have gone up a lot, are higher than we expected them to be, we think by issuing now we can save money versus interest issuing at the end of the year. And then also because we have the small refunding that we can do now, we can combine them into one transaction that keeps the the issuance costs lower because we're doing one transaction instead of 2 throughout the year. So there's a little bit of savings there. The resolution that's going to be before you is the underwriting team. So we do an RFP every handful of years to select the banks that help us access the capital markets. We generally rotate among that pool. We are choosing, what I'm proposing is that Bank of America, which is one of the largest underwriters in the country, lead this group. We think that they have the depth and experience in this volatile market to make this transaction successful. Wells Fargo is another solid large bank that we would recommend as a co-senior. Both these banks have helped us issue debt before, although not in the last few times we've gone to market. And then we would fill out the team with RBC Capital Markets, another solid bank, more regional, and then a couple of MWBE firms. Siebert Williams Shank is really a large national firm. They help us a lot with ideas. They're very they're present. They give us ideas about refunding. They talk to us about market. as does Loop Capital. Those are banks that we have used before. Loop Capital is another MWBE underwriting firm. And so we usually try to have a kind of a combination of different banks here. Again, the next month I plan to bring an intro and adopt on the bond ordinance, and then we'll talk more about what we expect in the rates, how it'll be structured, and that sort of thing. And we're hoping to go to the markets then in June. So that's why the intro and adopt. We're trying to move this quickly. And that's one of the points, again, about capital markets. We can move more quickly on these. We wanted to, we can fund a lot of projects versus if we were trying to add some new state revolving funds. We first have to apply for the state, wait for them to choose it, put it on the calendar. Same with WIFIA. Right now, we couldn't even apply for WIFIA loan. They haven't opened the letter of interest period for the next group yet. Then they take a few months to decide who gets in and who doesn't. Then we'd have a year to apply, and then we'd have to negotiate the transaction. So those are much slower to access money versus the capital markets. One other thing I just want to do, show you on the next page. I mentioned that we are accelerating this transaction because rates have risen. So I just want to show you what I mean by that. So those gray bars that you see up and down, that's actually the range of rates in each maturity year. So if we issue 30-year bonds, it's usually structured kind of like a mortgage where we have level debt service. You have principal and interest you're paying every year, and the total amount of those is roughly the same on an annual basis. But early in the period, you're paying less principal, more interest. Later, you're paying more principal, less interest. So you can see the range from 1 to 30-year maturities in the gray. That black bar in the middle is kind of the average where rates have been over the last 5 years. And I just picked 5 years just to give you a little bit of perspective of where rates have been. We would actually say that this entire period is low rate environment. Rates have been ridiculously low the last couple of years, and that's reflected kind of by the dotted blue line at the bottom. That's where rates were 3 months ago. So, 1 year, and these are benchmark municipal rates. So we would be borrowing it a little bit over a spread of these. But you can see that 1 year, 3 months ago, that a 1 year borrowing would be, less than 20 basis points. Today, it is over 1.5. So you're talking 100 to 150 basis points, or 1 to 1.5 full % change in this rate, in our rates in just the last 3 months. That is huge increase. We have not seen anything like this that has been sustained in a while. So, but still, the rates where they are now are still within the range of where they've been the last 5 years, which again, historically is still very low rate. So while it looks high compared to where we've been, these are still low rates. They're still good rates. The money is still accessible to us because we are high credit quality issuer. Investors will still be interested in our bonds, and we can still lock in some good rates. The rates on all of our, even when we issue SRF, are going to be up as well, lower than or higher than what we've seen recently, although still relatively low. So I know that's a lot of information. I wanted to give you just some perspective on where rates are and the types of debt that we use and why we're moving up this bond issuance. So are there any questions on anything that I went through? Trustee Fair, I don't see any questions in the room. Do you have any questions?
Tim, I don't have any questions, but I want to thank you for the thorough presentation. I thought it was extremely helpful.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then again, there will be a resolution on the agenda next week for that underwriting team. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Marion for the preliminary budget presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, trustees. Brian, Rich, and I are here today to present the district's strategic business plan and the preliminary budget for FY 2023. We distributed budgets to the trustees last month, so you all should have received those documents. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda that we'll cover today. Brian is going to talk about the strategic business and operating plan. Rich and I will cover our preliminary budgets, which include our operating budgets and our capital budgets. Then I will wrap it up by going over the next steps in the budget process. And we'll take any additional questions that you may have. If you have questions at any time during the presentation, please stop and we will address those questions for you. So I will turn it over to Brian to cover the strategic business plan.
Thank you, Marion. MSD's charter requires a rolling 5-year strategic business plan to be presented to the trustees every year as part of the budget approval process. You go to the next slide. There are 4 goals. These goals have remained the same for quite a few years. Deliver consistent high quality customer service, comply with all legal and regulatory requirements and schedules, minimize customer rate increases, and be accountable to the St. Louis community. You go to the next slide. The strategic business and operating plan is in your document that you've got, the budget document. It consists of 6 strategies in order to make those goals. The first one's to inform, educate, and partner to build stakeholder understanding, manage the district's costs and revenues to optimize financial impacts, integrate and improve the district's business processes, promote appropriate regulatory standards through proactive regulatory and legislative involvement, address customer and regulatory needs through a comprehensive infrastructure management program, and finally, create a learning and business-oriented culture based on competency and accountability. If you looked in your budget documents, each of these strategies has 2 to 7 separate objectives under each one of the strategies. Then each objective has numerous milestones, and those milestones are to be completed either in the first year, which in this case would be 2023, year 2, and the final category is year 3 through 5. So it gives us a good 5-year outlook with some immediate deliverables in the short term in the first 1 or 2 years. This process has worked very well. It's allowed us to keep track and keep our eye on the ball, not just on what's right in front of us, but what's going to occur in those out years and make sure we're heading in the right direction. What I'd recommend is, to whatever degree you wish, is go through that at your convenience, the business plan. If you have any questions for it, either at the meetings or if you want to give us a call, please feel free to call me. I'll go over anything on the business plan that you'd like to ask a question about. And if we need to have a detailed discussion, Marion's going to indicate we do have another review next month. We can go over any questions you have then, if that makes sense. Is there any comments on that? Marion, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Brian. Next slide, please. Slide 7. So this slide shows that the district is proposing a balanced budget as directed by charter, totaling $834 million roughly of revenues and expenditures. The components of each of these items will be discussed in more detail as we go through the presentation this morning. At the time that we prepared the preliminary budget, we were not aware that we were going to accelerate some revenue bonds that were issued, as Tim just described earlier. So we will be making some changes to this budget. I will bring those changes to you next month. As it's customary, we'll go through and tweak the preliminary budget, and then we'll bring final numbers to you next month. And again, I will cover the changes to the preliminary budget. But I can tell you that the revenue bonds that are shown in this chart will drop by about $120 million. Next slide, please. Okay. Here on slide 8, I'm going to provide an overview of the expenditures included in the budget, and I'll provide some additional details later in the presentation. Our general fund budget includes about a 4% or $4.8 million increase in personnel services, which is comprised primarily of a 3% or $2.5 million increase in salaries and FICA taxes. In addition, $2.2 million of the increase in personnel services relates to an increase in pension plan expenses. The general fund budget also includes $1 million in incremental expenses that are tied to strategic business plan objectives, and I'll cover those in more detail later in the presentation. Also, utilities are budgeted, and this is primarily electricity costs, are budgeted to increase by about $1.1 million, or 6%. Our contracted services are budgeted to increase by $2.5 million, or 5%, when you exclude the incremental expenses. The operating budget itself increased by about $11.2 million, or 5% when you include the incremental budget items that total a little bit over $1 million. The preliminary capital budget totals $431.8 million, and it includes about $406 million for wastewater projects, about $24 million for stormwater projects, and then about $1.5 million for the Oracle system upgrade, which will be funded from the general fund. When we prepared the budget, as I mentioned earlier, it assumed $573 million in bonds to be issued, but that amount again will be reduced by about $120 million. As is customary, the budget was developed to align with the March 2019 Rate Commission report. Next slide, please. So, as shown earlier, the district revenues are projected to be $833.6 million. The largest portion is revenue bonds, which are currently being shown as $573 million. That's 68.7% of the revenue forecast. The next largest portion is our wastewater user charges, which is $460.2 million. Then we have taxes that we anticipate receiving for stormwater, which is $45.2 million. Of that amount, $35.4 million is our stormwater O&M tax and our regulatory tax. The remaining $9.8 million relates to the OMCI subdistricts. The budget also includes the reinstatement of the Dry Voice Creek OMCI. We're projecting that will bring in an additional $1.5 million for that particular service area. Our investments and other income totals $11.3 million, and at the time the preliminary budget was done, we were projecting an increase in fund balance of about $256 million, but that amount will drop when I bring in the final budget by about $120 million, because again, we're not going to issue some of the revenue bonds that we were anticipating. Next slide, please. So this slide shows that the new monthly residential bill for a typical residential customer that uses 6 CCFs of water is projected to be $60.36. That's a 3.5% increase over the FY22 typical customer charge of $58.33. Next slide, please. So this chart depicts the preliminary district expenses, which again are projected to be about $834 million. The largest portion of our expense budget is our capital program, and you'll see those amounts in the graphs with the colors that are dark blue.
The system has detected
red.
that a minimum number of lines are connected to this conference. Do you want to continue your meeting? Press 1 to confirm. If there is no response, the conference will end.
We'll wait for just a second just to make sure we don't have any connectivity issues. Okay, thank you. So again, our capital budget is our largest expenditure. It's about $432 million, or 52% of our total expense budget. Our expected wastewater expenditures that are in dark blue comprise about $406 million of the amount, with stormwater, which is in red, comprising about $24 million. And then, as I mentioned before, have about a $1.5 million item for our Oracle project, which will be funded from the general fund. The next largest portion of our budget, or expense budget, is our operating budget, which is in the light blue and orange colors. That's about $236 million, or 28% of our total expense budget. And then finally, our debt service, which is in purple, is projected at about $166 million, or roughly 20% of our expense budget. Next slide, please, slide 12. So I'm going to take a little bit of time on this particular slide to kind of walk you through some of the variances that you see in this particular on this particular slide. So I'll start off with there's a $3.2 million increase in the executive director's budget, and that consists of a transfer of some security-related expenditures from the HR department, which you can see reflected in the $864,000 decrease in the HR budget. That decrease is primarily attributed to items that we moved from HR that related to security to the executive director's budget. The remaining increase consists of additional professional services for enhanced security for personnel working in the field and at the district's various facilities. The operations department budget increased by $2.6 million, with salary and FICA expenses totaling $1.5 million, or 3% increases. Pension cost also increased by $1 million, and our utilities, again, primarily electricity cost, increased by $1.1 million. The finance department's budget is projected to increase by $1.2 million, or about 4.9%. $931,000 of that amount is due to an increase in contractual services related to collection services, which is $702,000 increase, and a $379,000 increase in our bill payment services. The $978,000 increase in the engineering department's budget is primarily driven by a $963,000 or 4% increase in salaries, FICA, and pension contributions. The Rate Commission will reconvene in FY23, and we've budgeted $702,000, which relates to the professional services that the commission will use, which is projected to be $450,000, and then their public affairs and advertising services, which totals $250,000. The IT department budget reflects a $371,000 increase, which consists of $207,000 in personnel services, salaries, FICA, and pension contributions, along with the $70,000 increase in temporary help, which is needed for the Oracle upgrade project. There's also a $96,000 increase in the budget due to capital outlay expenses. This is primarily computer equipment that will be needed. The $79,000 increase, or of the $83,000 increase, I should say, in the general counsel's office relates to salaries and benefits. As I mentioned earlier, the decrease that you see in the HR budget of $864,000 relates to reductions in contractual services for security that was moved to the executive director's office. The secretary treasurer's budget is projected to decrease by $111,000. Of that amount, $185,000 relates to the management audit that we budgeted in FY22. We do that audit every 5 years, so that's not going to be repeated in FY23. And that deduction was offset by an increase of $38,000 related to personnel services. Finally, with respect to the incremental expenses that I mentioned, we have about $1 million of incremental expenses that are in the budget. $250,000 of that relates to the outsourcing of payroll functions in HR. There's $223,000 that we projected to convert contracted facility positions back to MSD positions. We actually did a bid for those services, and when we looked at those bid results, we did calculations and determined it's actually cheaper for us to move that back in to the district and perform those services internally versus contracting them out. There's $550,000 in incremental expenses that were budgeted in engineering for a linear asset management decision support tool. And there's $200,000 that's budgeted for the replacement of our water information system and our pre-treatment information system. Next slide, please. So this particular slide shows you a comparison of our current projections to numbers that we had when we issued our rate report back in 2019. So the current projections show a 4-year time period covered in the chart, which depicts the FY21 actual expenses, our FY22 forecast, and then our projection for FY23 and for FY24. So the first line item that I'd like to cover is that total revenue box. You will see that our revenues are declining or are substantially less than what we projected in our rate models. And that's primarily due to decreases in consumption. Also, when we were preparing the rate model projections, we were not going through a pandemic at that time. So obviously we did not anticipate reductions primarily in the commercial sector that took place as a result of companies either shutting down or utilizing less water as they reduced their production capabilities. Our expenses are also forecasted to go down, so it helps offset some of that revenue decline that we're currently projecting. So personnel services for the district are projected to be $38.4 million lower than the rate model, due primarily to vacancies. We have a couple of other line items. Utilities are actually projected to finish about $8 million less than what we anticipated when we did the rate model. And our contractual services are budgeted to be about $23 million less than the rate model predictions. Our debt service expenses are projected to be lower than we anticipated when we prepared the rate commission report. So that's, as Tim has pointed out, is primarily due to the refundings that have taken place, which has saved the district a considerable amount of money. So overall, our overall net line items are about 1.9% unfavorable to the rate commission projections. And we hope that over the next 2 fiscal years that we'll be able to make up that difference and come in right at what we're predicting in the rate model. Okay, before I turn it over to Rich to present the capital budget, are there any questions that I can answer regarding the preliminary operating budget? Okay, hearing none, I will turn it over to Rich and he will talk about the capital budget.
Good morning again, trustees. Today I'll be providing a summary of the district's proposed fiscal year 2023 Capital Improvement Replacement Program, or the CIRP. You received a copy of the CIRP preliminary budget supplement. It's actually an extra document that comes with the budget just for the capital program. Specific details by project appropriation, which includes a map providing the location for each project, the budget amount, the funding source, and the description of the work are in that supplement that we provided you. Today's presentation will provide a breakdown of the program. We'll summarize the different aspects of the program, the different categories of projects, and the expected results from the proposed projects. What I'm summarizing today is what I'll bring to you on a monthly basis during the Program Management Committee meeting when we make individual project appropriations. And again, at that time, we'll provide more details on the project, particularly relating to the bids or the selection process. Next slide, please. Next slide, this is the summary. We have the right one up there. May have gone 1, 2 minutes.
Go back.
That one right there. This gives a summary of the overall program. The total of the projects that we have, new projects are a total of 128 new projects for a total of approximately $410 million in projects. And then there are 7 projects, and I'll discuss this more in detail, that are projects that were planned for this current fiscal year that aren't going to make the budget for various reasons, which will give us a total of approximately $430 million in this year's budget. Of the projects, and I'll do further breakdowns of this, majority of the projects and dollars obviously are in the wastewater department, with the remaining being part of the stormwater. Next slide, please. This chart represents a breakdown of the two major categories of projects in the proposed CRP. Two separate business lines, both wastewater and stormwater. As always, the majority of the budget dollar amounts, 94% is the wastewater program to address requirements of the consent decree to maintain the system, addressing regulatory issues in the separate sanitary and combined areas, and of course at our wastewater treatment plants. The remaining 6% of the program is for stormwater work. This includes our OMCIs. This includes some projects which we hope to receive ARPA or American Rescue Plan funds that were awarded by the federal government earlier this year. And then mostly those are for stormwater projects. Please know that at times we have multiple appropriations on one project for different tasks or split funding between wastewater and stormwater. I'll usually explain that to you when I ask for the appropriation as we try to combine some of those projects. So sometimes you'll notice there are more than 128 projects noted in the budget. Next item. This chart shows the new wastewater investment represented by the number of projects and appropriation of the value of work through different locations within the district. Majority of the wastewater CRP for fiscal year 23, about 49% will take place on projects at our 7 wastewater treatment plants, which includes beginning the construction of our largest project, the Bissell and Lime fluidized bed incinerator projects, and the upgrade to our Lower Merrimack wastewater treatment plant phase 2 expansion. Both of these are which are large-scale, multi-year projects. 5% of the work is performed district-wide. And I'll cover those projects in a little more detail a little later on. 44% of the work will happen in St. Louis County, and the remaining 2% of the program will take place in the city of St. Louis. One of the reasons you're seeing a large amount of work in the county is obviously our emphasis in the separate sewer area to address separate sewer overflows. Those are our tunnels and tank projects that we've been bringing to you over the last few years. And obviously the removal of inflow and infiltration, or we refer to as I&I projects, we've been performing in primarily St. Louis County. As the program evolves, you'll see the shift of these percentages to the combined sewer program, particularly a large tunnel along River to Pear, and obviously every year green infrastructure in both the Bissell and the River to Pear watershed. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see 63% of the program is CD related. This is less this year because the Bissell and Lime fluidized bed, which is a significant project, is not a consent decree project, but it is regulatorily required and needed to upgrade our incinerators to meet our air quality permits at those plants. Next slide, please. This slide represents a breakdown of our funding sources, where the project funds come from for our project. As indicated, the majority of the projects by dollar amount are wastewater projects, and those are funded through the Sanitary Replacement Fund, approximately 90% of the overall funding. 4% of the program will come from the general fund. These are projects such as CSO, the green infrastructure projects, district-wide vendor and support services, primarily for my department, engineering, data collection, collection of CCTV, which is closed circuit television of the sewers, radar rainfall and stream flow monitoring. The remaining projects are funded from stormwater funds and the OMCI taxing district. Next slide, please. This is a little breakdown of the OMCI funding. Marion talked a little bit about it. One note on this one is the addition of the Gravois Creek OMCI. The county and the municipalities had an interest in turning that OMCI back on, so that was added to the list. So that makes a total of 7 OMCI districts which will generate approximately $9.7 million for stormwater projects throughout the district and within the respective OMCI districts. 6 of those OMCIs, we're holding out half of those funds for the reimbursement program. I brought 3 of those to you guys. Program Management Committee allows the municipality to do projects of priority to them within the OMCIs. This entire stormwater program that we're doing was initiated through extensive public outreach we did with the municipalities and the counties in determining which OMCIs we did turn back on and how to fund stormwater capital. And obviously, we'll be seeking additional capital dollars here in the near future. Next slide, please. This chart provides a breakdown of the planned appropriations for the CIRP between engineering and construction services. MSD has 3 major construction management contracts, which makes up a substantial portion of the $63.5 million or 15% of the program that goes towards engineering, design, and construction management. And the remaining portion of the program is used for construction, which is 85% or $347 million of the overall program. I always give a little history of this. When we started consent decree in 2012 and 13, a large part of the program at that time, because we were in the initial stages of designing a lot of our program, the engineering part was about 31%. For about the first 5 years, it ranged between 25 and 30%. We've leveled off over the last 3 or 4 years, right around 15%. And again, that's primarily, we're still have a significant engineering program, but we're also doing construction management on our large facility projects. As the capital program shifts to these large projects, we utilize outside more expertise in the management of those projects. Thus, the engineering costs have leveled off at that 15%. Next item. This I told you I'd talk a little bit about. There are projects that for this fiscal year, currently fiscal year 22, that will continue into next year. There's a total of 7 of those projects. Actually, it's 6, and I'll update this again in May. Obviously, it's projects that maybe we get completed that we didn't anticipate. We did the preliminary budget. These projects, there's a total of 6 wastewater projects and 1 stormwater projects. These are primarily delayed by easement acquisition. 4 of the 7, we're still acquiring easements for the project, and thus we'll appropriate those primarily in the first quarter of next fiscal year. And then there are a couple of projects where we're working, negotiate with the property owners. One is a buyout, and one is some services on the particular project that we're working. Again, like I said, I'll update this in May. One of those projects I know for a fact was the St. George project I brought to you today. So that project went off on time. We originally did not think we were going to get our easements for that project. Again, I'll adjust that. I don't think we'll be adding any in between now and the end of the year, but I think hopefully we may have gotten a couple of these. Next slide, please. And every year in the CIRP, we can include projects we refer to as contingency projects. They are projects currently scheduled for fiscal year 2024, but if there's funding available, i.e. the projects get carried over, or we have a number of projects come in under budget, and we have the opportunity to move a project forward, we will do that. A lot of times you'll see more on the stormwater side where the funding is available to us and we were able to get easements early. We don't want to delay. We want to go ahead and get that project built. The contingency also includes some of the phase funding. Large projects we fund over multiple years, and depending on the cash flow of those large projects, occasionally there's funding needed early, and those projects are listed on the contingency list as well. This year, I think we brought a couple stormwater projects. That was about it. We were pretty much on budget with the program this year. So, but we want to have those available. something we started a few years ago. That way we were trying to spend most of the budget we had for the fiscal year. Next item, this number noted of the types of projects that we're doing. And again, there's several categories of projects that we do. In your packet, there's a more detailed explanation of each one of these categories, and it actually gives examples of the specific types of projects that we have planned for this fiscal year under each one of these categories. If, as you're looking at that additional information we provided, you have any questions on a specific project or the type of project or why we're doing a certain project, feel free to give me a call. Or again, you'll have opportunity anywhere between now and next month. Feel free to bring that question next month as we'll be updating any changes to this. But I'll kind of briefly go over it. There's a total of, again, 133 projects, new projects that we'll be bidding. The different categories. The largest category as far as expenditures go is on the treatment plant. We have 17 projects in the treatment plant area, and that's 46% of the budget. And again, that's primarily due to the funding of the Lower Merrimack Treatment Plant Expansion Project and the Bissell and Lemay Fluidized Bed Project, which we're procuring right now. The next is the SSO category. There's 37 projects for approximately $128 million or 31% of the budget. Again, I talked a little bit about that. That's our effort to reduce sanitary sewer overflows. You'll see that number shift to the combined sewer overflow over the next few years. We have a major milestone that's required by the end of calendar year 2023 to have all but a small number of our sanitary sewer overflows out by the end of 2023. So you'll see that. And then the other various categories, significant, probably the most where a lot of work takes place is our asset management. Obviously, we've got a lot of facilities out there, both stormwater and wastewater facilities, sewers, pump stations, treatment plants. We've got 11 projects, primarily to line sewers and to make improvements to pump stations for about 7% of the budget, or approximately $28 million. Kind of a breakdown. Again, there's a more detailed breakdown of those categories in that supplemental information that we've provided you. So that kind of concludes my presentation on the capital program. I'm open to any questions. Are there any questions on the CIRP? All right, I'll turn it back over to Marion for next steps.
Thank you, Rich. So we can go to the next slide. So I'll cover the remaining steps relating to the budget process. So we're required to publish a notice of a public hearing that will take place in May, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. We will do that this month. As I mentioned earlier, I will bring back to the Finance Committee revised and final budget numbers that we will show you the changes that have been made from the preliminary budget. We intend to introduce the budget at the Board of Trustees meeting on May the 12th. After that meeting, we will have a public hearing, which will consist of our Finding of Facts Committee reviewing the proposed stormwater taxes. Prior to that public hearing, I will contact each of the trustees that have volunteered to serve on that committee. We'll go over the process with you. I will send you the documentation that will need to be reviewed. And certainly if you have any questions, we will address your questions. We intend to bring the budget back to you on June the 9th for the adoption of the budget. Are there any questions that I can address relating to the remaining steps in the process? Okay, hearing none. In the presentation, there are some additional slides that we included. We're not going to cover those today. That's just additional detail information. If you have any questions regarding those slides, please let me know and we'll get you answers. Thank you for your time and your attention this morning. That concludes our budget presentation.
All right, thank you, Marion. Thank you, Rich and Tim and everyone on your teams. It's a lot of work. We really appreciate the thorough presentation. If there's no other business for this committee, the next tentative meeting date is May 3rd, 2022. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
All right, thank you all.
Welcome everyone to the Stakeholder Relations Committee meeting of April. Can I get a roll call?
Yes, we will.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, can I get a motion to approve the committee meeting minutes from March 1st?
Second.
Okay, with no objection, the minutes are approved. Okay, there are no comments by the chair. We'll move on to Ms. Paradis. Good morning.
Good morning.
She will give us the report on the semi-annual diversity.
Thank you. My name is Shauna Paredes. I'm the manager of diversity programs, and I'll be giving the semi-annual fiscal year FY22 report this morning. I will be covering the capital program for quarters 1 and 2. That includes the construction, workforce utilization for construction, design, and workforce utilization for design, our small contractor infrastructure repairs program, and community benefits agreement updates, as well as our disparity study update information. Next slide. First, I'll cover the construction component. In capital construction, there were 30 projects worth $24.1 million during this period, 28 non-building projects. One was under $50,000 and did not contain goals. And there were 2 projects funded with the state revolving funds. And from those awards, nearly 28% or $6.6 million was committed to MWBE businesses. What you see here is the majority of the projects during this time period had the 17% African American MBE participation goals, which essentially most all of the participation fell under the minority MBE category, resulting in a WBE commitment participation of 2.86%. And finally, on active projects, MSD paid out $103 million, with nearly 24% of those funds made to minority and women-owned businesses that were performing work on our active projects. $15.7 million was paid to minority-owned firms, and $8.5 million went to women-owned construction firms. Next slide. The next couple of slides I'll cover the construction workforce for our capital program on active projects. So the goals for our construction projects are located on the left. To the right are the actual hours worked on the active projects. Boots on the ground hours were about 270,000, and 60 active building and non-building construction projects were active during the period, and 78,000 hours were performed on the 20 active state-funded projects that were active during that period. And the percentages for those 80 projects I'll cover on the next slide. Next slide. So overall, the workforce programs remain consistent with our past performance that we've seen in the construction area. Overall, minorities represented 27.40% of boots on the ground, and women worked 8.14% on active projects during the period on those 80 projects that were active. 56.84% of the total training hours were training that was done by minorities and women. So our projects are actively having a lot of training going on, with well over 50% of that training going to diverse workers. So next I'll cover the design projects. So in the area of design, there were 17 design contract awards totaling $7 million, with nearly 64% of the total spend committed to MWBE firms without any goals in place. MBE firms made $3.5 million, or 50% of the contracts that were awarded, and WBEs received nearly 14% of those contracts. Payments made on active contracts during the period were $8.8 million, with $6.1 million going to minority firms and $2.6 million to women-owned firms. This represented 53.61% on active professional services contracts. And on the left, you see here with regards to the local office workforce on our active projects, minority participation represented 16.51%, and women participation represented 36.53%. And again, these numbers are pretty consistent with the numbers that we've been seeing across our projects on the design side for the past 3 years. The next part of the information is on the small contractor program. The small contractor program, the program is funded annually and continues to produce real opportunities for MBEs and WBEs. And as you can see here, for the first half of the fiscal year, in terms of dollars spent, the total program spend was $2.1 million, and 50% of the total program dollars were awarded to MBE and WBE businesses. There was a total of 155 projects. So for this year, with nearly half of those projects, those were performed by minority and women contractors who performed as primes on the program. Next slide.
A quick question.
Okay.
Shauna. On the small contractor program, are all contracts less than 50K targeted for that group, or?
On the small contractor program, the program is set up to where 50% of all the bidding opportunities go to MBEs and WBEs. So for every project that is bid, there are 2 non-MWBEs and 2 MBEs who have bidding opportunities on the program.
It's not, you've got contractor pool that is structured.
Correct, correct. And these are pre-qualified contractors that we have on the program. The next part of the information is our community benefits agreement information. What you see here is a list of the community benefits signatories. And right now we are working to schedule our next meeting with them. It will actually follow this meeting sometime this month. So we will be having some updates during our annual report for the community benefits agreements and the initiatives that we're working on with the signatories with them. But what I'll cover today is any of the activities that took place in the first half of our fiscal year 22, which is found on the next slide. So we have ongoing initiatives in education and internships within our community benefits agreement. And under the education and internships, what you see here is our planned activities for this coming summer and activities that we have ongoing that took place throughout the year. So for this summer, we have planned high school summer interns to be here at MSD within our legal department, human resources, and our finance area this summer. And then for the SIUE Environmental Resource Training program, where there's certification for treatment plant operators that we fund through full ride scholarships and stipend to minority and women students. This past year, we sponsored 2 full ride scholarships, and I'm happy to say that the scholarship recipients was a minority male and a female, and they've done well this current year. And what where they are in the program at this point in time is finishing up the academic portion of the certification program, and they will start their required internships that they have to complete in order to take the examination to become certified. So they did very well, and we're starting the outreach for this year's scholarships this month. So starting this month and running through August, we'll be recruiting to award additional scholarships for that program.
How long is that program?
It runs from August through May for the academic portion, and then in the summer, they do the required 5-week internships at a wastewater treatment plant and at a stormwater treatment plant, and they typically take examinations around July.
So it's basically a year with it.
1-year program. And the next part of the information is the disparity study update. So in my final report today on the disparity study, MSD delivered the results of the disparity study to the public on March 23rd. I would like to share the results of the findings along with the recommendations and remedies that came as a result of the disparity study findings. This first slide are the race and gender conscious remedies at both the prime and the subcontract levels. These recommendations are narrowly tailored to the ethnic and gender groups which had documented disparities. And there were 3 recommendations at the prime level and 2 at the subcontract level. At the prime level, they recommended incentive credits for professional services, sheltered market programming, and mentor-protege programs to increase the capacity of MWBEs where there were discoveries of disparities of significance. And then at the subcontract level, they recommended setting subcontracting goals to remedy the disparities And they also recommended revised requirements to further define the commercial useful functions within the construction and trucking industry. Next slide. Race and gender neutral remedies are offered to enhance the procurement processes and remove program barriers that minorities, women, and small businesses encounter when they're attempting to do business with MSD. So these recommendations here do not require findings of statistically significant disparities to be implemented, but they are designed to increase the capacity of MWBEs and other small businesses who want to do business with MSD as primes and or as with MSD prime contractors as subcontractors. The recommendations for those were to modify our electronic subcontracting system to report on both non-MWBEs and MWBEs within our reporting systems, and to also list MWBE participation in all bids and proposals during active contracts. The final piece of information is the workforce recommendations. We performed a workforce study analysis, which resulted in goals for construction, non-building and building areas of 37% minority, 11% women, construction apprenticeships, 46%, and engineering professional services of 31% minorities and 37% women. And minorities and women in either category represent, for construction, of course, the boots on the ground, and for professional services, it represents the office workforce working on the active project. And in the final slide is the location where there's a website location where all of the disparity study information can be found, including all of the documents for the disparity study. There's a recording of the disparity study presentation, as well as a copy of the PowerPoint presentation located at the website. What we plan to do is continue to conduct outreach and meet with stakeholders through the time that we will be presenting this information to the board for consideration. Right now, we will collect all of that information and plan on presenting it to the board in June. And then once we have approval, we will begin the implementation plans for any changes across our programs that would need to take place. And right now, we anticipate with the recommendations and changes, we believe that we will be able to implement the program changes at our next fiscal year, FY24, that begins July 1st of 2023. And that concludes my report. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you. Are there any comments, questions?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like just briefly to say something. One, mostly congratulations to Shauna and all the folks who work with us. What you can't see in some of these numbers, this process is determining the availability of different classes, of different ethnicities of companies compared to the percentage that they actually participate in your program. So one of the biggest changes that happened here, and you see those reflected in numbers, such as us having goals for engineering contracts, which is very unusual for us. But that number of percent companies that are diverse, for instance, in engineering or construction, has gone up 25%. So if they were 30% before, they're now 55%. You'll notice the workforce, same way. the availability of minority and women workers for our work went up 10%. So one thing that's hidden there is Sean and her group did a great job of making the program match the old goals and the old study. I want to give her great kudos for that. And I would put to you also that probably the increase in the availability, especially of the enterprise firm companies, has a lot to do with the success of Shauna's program and getting folks in and getting them available to do the work. So it's going to be an interesting process. Shauna's got a lot of work to do through the end of the calendar year, but I know she's up to it. So I just want to help you realize just how successful Shauna's program has been.
Very good.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. And I'm looking forward to your numbers that you're going to, or the next iteration of the program, I guess, is next iteration of the goal that
Yes.
you'll be presenting later this year. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And we'll move on to Ms. Coleman, gonna give his presentation of a number of resolutions.
Good morning, trustees. I'd like to bring your attention to Resolution 3741. That would be for Gallagher Benefit Services. Gallagher is the consulting firm that we use to help with the district's medical plan, the dental plan, the life insurance plan, the accidental death and dismemberment, the employee legal plan that they can purchase into, and long-term disability. The district utilizes Gallagher to provide those comprehensive benefit consulting services. And this resolution will authorize MSD to exercise its option to renew a contract agreement for a third year term with the same annual fee. So we've had a 4-year contract with them and with 1 year with 3 option years. And this will allow us to go into that second option year. The cost of this is $46,000. And this particular resolution will authorize us to exercise that year. Are there any questions about the resolution for Gallagher and their professional consulting service? Well, then I'd like to move on to the next resolution, which is Resolution 3742. This resolution is for our insurance brokerage and consulting services. The current vendor that we use is Charles Crane Agency. And Charles Crane provides the insurance brokerage and insurance consulting services that the district uses. Working with Charles Crane allows the district to act as the district's broker to help facilitate the purchasing of all of our liability insurances and property insurances. We were in a 5-year contract with them that was 1 year with 4 option years. And this particular resolution will allow us to go into the last of those option years. The cost of that would be $70,000. And the district will enter into this contract starting on September 1st of 2022 through August 31st of 2023. Trustees, are there any questions about the Charles Crane resolution? Okay. Then I'd like to move on to Resolution 3743. That is currently with Thomas McGee LLC. They're our third-party claims administrator. And what this organization does for us is that they provide the claims administration services for water backup, workers' compensation, general liability, auto, errors and omissions, and any other claims that the district might be dealing with regard to any settlements that we're trying to resolve. We were in a 5-year contract that was 1 year with 4 option years, and we were looking to go into the last option year with Thomas McGee, who has done a very good job for MSD. The cost of this would be for $645,000, and this particular resolution would allow us to enter into that last term. Are there questions at all about the resolution for Thomas McGee? Well, if not, I thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'm gonna need a motion to go into closed session to discuss legal, confidential, or privileged matters under section 610, 21(1).
So moved.
Second.
All right, thank you, and we'll do a roll call vote. Trustee Watson? Trustee Nicholasison?
Yes.
Trustee Wilson?
Yes.
Trustee Fair?
Yes.
Trustee Evans?
Yes.
All right, we're in closed session.
Trustee.
Okay, I'd like a motion to come out of closed session.
Second.
Okay, we're out of closed session with, if there's no additional business, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, that is it.
Thank you, everyone.
Meeting
Thank
is
you.
adjourned. Pleasure of my life, folks.